Everything which I see here, you could say, is a kind of virtual reality.
Is consciousness a byproduct of the brain?
If the hard problem of consciousness will remain hard, we might have to accept that reality really has two sides, that there is a matter side and a mind side.
In the context of astrophysics, is there any type of answer or hypothesis on whether we have free will, or is everything determined?
In quantum mechanics, you can measure the position, but if you do that, the less you can say about velocity and the other way around. In general relativity, space-time is a dynamic medium, so it is more on a par with matter and energy. Time does not exist.
Before we start this podcast, I just want to make one humble request. If you haven't already, please do subscribe to this channel and press the notifications bell icon. This really helps us bring more guests to the show and have the platform to spread wisdom. Thank you and enjoy the podcast. When you talk about the science of mind, can you elaborate on that a little bit, just for people who might not?
Sure. The sort of experiments that I am now thinking about and talking about with other people, both scientists and contemplatives, from both sides of the matter and the mind side, something like here is this cup as a material object. If I look at the cup, then I see a material object. If I close my eyes, I don't see it anymore. Mm-hmm. So the connection I have with the cup is by seeing it or by holding it. If I would not have any sensory connections with the cup, I wouldn't know there would be a material cup. So at the one hand, I think, I feel, I have the experience of dealing with a piece of matter, but if you analyze it, it is really an experience of having the experience of matter. Mm-hmm. It is the seeing and it's the feeling, the touching that makes me give the experience to say, this is an experience of matter. I don't say I see and I feel and I hear if I do. No, I say I experience a piece of matter. The notion that there is such a thing as a piece of matter is an extrapolation of all the different ways that you can deal with it. And it makes sense in daily life that you talk about matter. But if you see what is really going on empirically in your experience as something you can test, I can never test that there is something like the conceptual idea of matter. Matter is the name of a concept, and a concept is part of my mind. I can entertain a concept, develop one, discard a concept, etc. But I cannot put the material cup in my mind, but I can work with concepts of the cup. And if you analyze it that way, then objectively speaking, starting with matter, here I am with a body and a mind in a material world. But if you really ask on the level of empirical certainty, on the level of what you can test and what you can find in your experience, by definition, anything I know about the universe is an experience of what I know, and by definition, that is part of my mind. Mm. So everything which I see here, you could say, is a kind of virtual reality, insofar as I experience it in my mind. So from that point of view, if I would build, and I'm trying to do that, if I would build a science of mind, I would start with the notion of mind. Within a mind of an individual, there is all the knowledge about the subjective and objective aspects of the world. And within the mind, I have a picture of the world. And within that world, there is a picture in the picture of my body somewhere in the universe, with a mind associated. So there is my notion of a mind connected with my body in the world. And there is a notion of the empirical mind in which that whole world picture is embedded. So it's like a very simple Russian doll. It's my empirical mind, the raw mind that in which all experience by definition is entertained. There is no experience which is not out of my mind, since that would be part of my mind if it would be an experience. So here is the collection, the outer shell, the collection of all my experiences. Inside there is this picture of the world, which I say I know empirically, but actually it is inside a larger mind. And then within the world there is the small picture, the virtual picture of my body and my mind. Does it make any sense?
It does. This is where I think the conversation really got interesting. So a lot of follow-ups I have, first of all, with this. So first of all, yeah, I understand what you're saying. I don't know if you've heard of David Chalmers ever. Or
I know him very well. That's
really?
I've been on panels with him over the many years, and yeah.
Perfect. So I think it's wonderful.
By the way, he is not only a great philosopher, but also a great human being. It's so nice whenever I meet him, the way that he has attention for his colleagues as well as his students, and we are really lucky to have such a compassionate person, I would say, in being not only excited about what he is doing, but really willing to help people around him.
That's wonderful. We would love to hear this. And because we definitely want to have him on the show as well. This is perfect to bring this in. The hard problem of consciousness is one of my favorite topics to talk about. I can go on and on about it. And I the reason I brought this up was because it's kind of related to what you were talking about, right? When you were giving your example, that I guess it's the whole idea that when you're drinking this sip of coffee, and just materialist scientists would say, right, that, there's specific neurons that are interacting in your brain, and that's why you're tasting the coffee. But if that was the case, then I would be tasting a bunch of neurons firing, which is not the case, right? I'm having a subjective experience of coffee, and my subjective experience of the same coffee might be different than yours, right? You might think it's bitter, I might think it's sweet, whatever that is. That's where the hard problem of consciousness comes in, right? So let's talk a little bit about that, because I know it's related to what you were saying. And a follow-up to that would also be that if you can clarify that according to you, then is consciousness or human consciousness a byproduct of the mechanisms of the brain, or does consciousness come first and then the mind? Because when we talk about the mind, right, it's like a bunch of, I like to use a metaphor of like coding, like we're in a way like we're coded or engineered, right? We have a bunch of memories in our mind, a lot of the things we learned when we were kids, or by our parents or whatever it is, and it's all kind of just coded into our brain as what we're doing now. But is consciousness before that, in the way that it is also consciousness is there, and then that is also aware of the brain or mind? So let's talk about and get your input on those things.
Well, from now on, already from the previous step on, I really have to choose which of the forks of the road, which hat I put on. Most people, and already the way you formulated the question, that is the way of formulating it in the road in which you assume that the whole world is material, and then there is something called mind or consciousness, which sort of comes out, whether it's the steam out of the steam engine or whatever model people have used. That is one way, and it may or may not be true. There are many emerging properties, especially in ecology and in evolution, and so which have a material basis, but the behavior is so much more complex than the way atoms or molecules behave. The material world, is full of emerging properties. Now, whether consciousness could be emergent properties, and I'm glad you mentioned the hard problem of consciousness. which David Chalmers came up with. What is it? Almost 35 years ago. If the hard problem of consciousness will remain hard, and if we don't find a way to work with and explain consciousness as coming out of matter, we might have to accept that reality really has two sides, that there is a matter side and a mind side. An example would be within the theory of matter. A beautiful example is magnetism and electricity. People realize that magnetism influences electricity. If you move a magnet, you can create an electric field. If you move an electrical recharged object, you can create a magnetic field. So there is a relation between the two. But until Maxwell found out how exactly that relationship works mathematically in the Maxwell equations, until that they only knew there was some sort of interaction. But for a short time, there was the hard problem of magnetism. The hard problem of magnetism was that you have electrical charges, and of course, an electrical charge is by definition has an electric field.
Right.
We don't know a magnetic charge. We know a magnetic magnet, but always a south pole and a north pole together. We never have an individual magnetic south pole or magnetic north pole. So the south and the north pole, we know, are formed by electrons moving around in a magnet. And it's the electrical motion which creates the magnetic field. So before Maxwell, we knew there are electric charges. We know there are no magnetic charges. And they both can influence each other, but it seemed that magnetism was a byproduct of electric charges. If they sit still, they make an electric field. If they move around, they create a magnetic field. But both electric and magnetic field are made by electric charges.
Right.
Doesn't it sound like the hard problem of matter and mind? That there seems to be only matter. And if the electrons, if the electric charge is still, there is no magnetic field. If a body is perfectly still, it's a corpse, and there is no mind. So it is the motion within a magnet which creates a magnetism besides electricity. Well, it seems that the motion of the fluids in our body and electrical and fluid, etc., somehow is connected with the mind. Without that, there would be no mind. So I think, I don't say that it's a causal analogy, but there are enough things similar that if we now look at the history of magnetism, at the moment that Maxwell had put all the experimental evidence together, he could write the Maxwell equations for electromagnetism, the combined electricity and magnetism. And guess what? If you have empty space with no electric charges and automatically no magnetic charges, because we have never found one, if you have empty space, you can have still motions in the electric field and in the magnetic field combined. The electromagnetic field, that's a new concept, has wave motions, makes waves possible. And the electromagnetic waves are light and radio. And in one moment of writing down the Maxwell's equations, Maxwell was the first human being seeing that, coming up with an explanation for what light is. Light is partly electric, partly magnetic. And the fact that there is static electricity and no static magnetism is just a fluke. the underlying equations are completely symmetric between electricity and magnetism. So my working hypothesis, what I am now exploring, is the other branch. Is the branch in which the mind is equally fundamental as matter, and that the phenomenon of life needs needs a combined medium, just like electromagnetism, both you need for light and radio waves. So the matter-mind components working together in a new theory could explain the hard problem of consciousness, not as a problem of projecting the mind back on matter. Maybe the answer is that it's a dance between both of them.
Right.
Does it make sense?
That does, yeah. I like the way you phrase that, a dance between both of them. So when you have conversations with David and panels, do you guys, I guess, in a way agree with a lot of the things said in relation to consciousness?
Well, I'm very glad you asked, because now I can go back in memory lane. In 1992, David Chalmers for the first time talked about the hard problem of consciousness in a very small local workshop among friends and colleagues in Tucson. And later it was called Tucson 1. Because 2 years later, within a few months, people wrote about it in scientific journals, in popular journals, about the high problem of consciousness. What a great idea that was. And soon people decided, well, we need an official conference, and people, not only the people locally who talked about it and who could easily attend, we want to have more people from all, not only philosophers, also scientists of different types. And 2 years later, also in Tucson, we got Tucson 2. I still have the T-shirt of Tucson 2. And I was one of the people invited to give a talk there, together with a colleague I was working with in that time, whose name is Roger Shepard. He was one of the leading cognitive psychologists. It was soon before his retirement at Stanford. And we are talking about 1994, so that is 31 years ago. And he and I together gave a talk, he the psychologist and me the physicist, astrophysicist. And we gave a talk, and the title we chose is Turning the Hard Problem Upside Down and Sideways.
Wow.
And what we said there is that we came up with Roger. Unfortunately, Roger passed away a few years ago, but he was already in his 90s. He was close to retirement then. Roger mentioned to me that he has long thought about this problem. Of course, the hard problem of consciousness was already a problem that Plato and Aristotle and Socrates and people in other cultures discussed. And a few hundred years ago, what was discussed by Kant and Hegel and Fichte and so many other people. But the genius of David Chalmers was that he managed to reformulate that age-old problem in a way that scientists could understand, and not only understand, that scientists could get excited about. So you could say what he is most famous for was a brilliant educational move. But I think that is sort of underselling him, because without the so-called brilliant educational move, it would have taken, I think, possibly a lot longer and less with a bang that suddenly everybody thought, oh, let's work on this. So it had an enormously positive effect on the field. It basically created the modern field of consciousness, you could say, as far as a visible thing for young people to latch onto and to start working in.
And he
So-
believes in panpsychism, I believe.
So that fits in perfectly with the story. So so Roger Shepard and I both had been thinking about the hard problem of consciousness without calling it that way for decades.
Wow.
He for more decades than me, since he was a generation older. But we each had a different approach when we met.
Yeah.
We actually met in the Santa Fe Institute, not in an astronomy place, not in a psychology place, but he was. Do you mind if I make a segue or?
Yeah, no, whatever you want, yeah.
What happened is that in 1994, in the spring, there was a conference which was organized by the head of the Sloan Foundation, one of the foundations which gives a lot of money to many scientists.
Yes, of course.
The president of the Sloan Foundation was about to retire, and he had decided, the last thing I do before retiring is to organize a small conference with invitation only at the Santa Fe Institute, which was at that point beginning to be famous as the place where people studied complexity, and it was the first real dedicated institute for complexity studies. So he chose that as a place to ask the question, are there limits to scientific knowledge? And his motivation was, as he told us, there were about 24 people invited, mathematicians, physicists, computer scientists, and mostly people in natural science. Mm-hmm. When we gathered there, it was a whole week. He had said he had invited us because for 25 years he had been giving out money to increase the area of scientific knowledge. If he wanted to, his mandate was to enlarge, to make larger the human knowledge about science. But he said, now I want to do something altogether different. I want to know, is it possible to say something to the limits of knowledge? And that was a wonderful idea, because this was towards the end of the 20th century, which had seen limits to the knowledge of space and time. Relativity says that the speed of light is a limit for speeds, this for material speed. Mm-hmm. And quantum mechanics is a limit to what you can measure, an uncertainty principle. And in mathematics, Gödel had published his Gödel theorems, which put a limit on what you can prove. You can prove that there are things which you can neither prove nor disprove.
Right.
And all three happened within one generation. It happened they all happened in the first third of the 20th century, between 1905 and 1935. So it was a really interesting question. What else is there which we can say that there are limits to? So I went there, and what happened was that we talked for a week very excitedly about all kinds of topics. It was wonderful to meet other people who were handpicked to think out of the box. I mean, completely out of the box from the outside. What are the limits rather than the growth inside the box? But then something fun happened. On the last day, the last half day, Saturday morning, so it was 5.5 days. the announcement of the retiring director of the Sloan Foundation was that he said, I set aside some extra money for some grants. If for each of you, if you want to do some further research besides this week about the limits of scientific knowledge, please write down just one page and a few ideas, and as long as it seems have a decent and that it seems like something connected with this conference, I would be very happy to give you a small grant. You have all worked together. You have built up a small community of how to think about these problems. I would like this not to stop here at the end of the first week. I would like it to continue. So just give me something by the end of the conference, and just some ideas, and you can fill it in later. And then I can see what I can do with the money. That was completely unexpected. He had not announced that, and he would not have said it had he not really enjoyed himself, and had he not come to the conclusion that it actually was a useful thing to do. But guess what happened?
What?
What happened is that in the end, it seems maybe it changed a bit later, but the first reaction on that day is that he got only one proposal.
Oh.
There was one piece of paper where two people immediately said, "Oh, I want to do this," and a quick sketch. And my guess would be that later, with or without prodding, maybe some other people, I would guess, I mean, if there is some money, somehow or other, people find a way to use it. Or maybe it just took extra time to come up with an idea. But the one proposal was by Roger Shepard and me.
Oh.
And the funny thing is that I was an astrophysicist, not connected with the three limits of scientific knowledge in pure physics, in both of them in pure physics, quantum mechanics and relativity theory, or in mathematics. Actually, in computer science, there are also similar limits of what you cannot do. But the halting problem in computer science, you can prove that it is impossible to calculate for any given program whether or not it will stop. If you could prove that there are paradoxes. So that was a number 4 thing. But neither Roger nor I were computer scientists or physicists or mathematicians. So he was really surprised, and we were surprised that we were the only ones. And we were joking to each other. I think Roger came up. He was a very joking type of person. He said, we should give the director a T-shirt saying that I went to the Santa Fe Institute, and all I got was a psychologist and an astrophysicist.
Wow.
We never did it, but it was a nice idea. So that is how, completely as a fluke, Roger and I met each other. And the next year, and then we got a grant. And once a month, I spent a weekend with Roger on a fundamental problem with inviting 5 people around what fits around the table, and to talk for a whole weekend about this fundamental problem. One being the hard problem of consciousness, of course, but a number of other ones too. So during that time, Roger Shepard and I got to know each other quite well. And then we started writing a paper for putting together our ideas. And then we heard about the Tucson 2. That was 1 year. Sorry, I'm 2 years off. Tucson 1 was 1994.
Okay.
The same time that we had the limits to scientific knowledge meeting. Then we got a 2-year grant to organize these workshops and to work together. Then in 1996, we were invited to give a talk at the Tucson 2, the first big conference. And we combined in one talk Roger's idea, namely that you can turn the heart problem upside down. You don't necessarily, by fiat, say that the mind comes out of the brain.
Right.
You can also say, well, we know that we have a mind. And we use the mind to experience matter, but we cannot deny that there is a mind. But we could deny that there is matter, and that is all in the mind.
Like an appearance in a way.
Yeah, exactly. So that was the turning the heart problem of consciousness upside down. And then what I brought in was to turn it sideways. And to turning it sideways is the idea of what I just said about electricity and magnetism. It is neither electricity nor magnetism which makes radio waves or makes light. You need both. So rather than saying mind coming out of matter or turning it upside down, matter out of mind, maybe they are two parts of reality. Maybe every coin of reality has a mind side and a matter side. So we combined those two ideas, and it was nice to see that actually people took note of that, because the first few years after that conference, I visited David Chalmers a few times. I went to Santa Cruz where he was teaching, and we hit it right off, many things to discuss together. And then for maybe 15 years, I never met him. And then in 2015, I knocked on his door, his email door, and we had a drink together again. And one of the first things he told me was, oh, it's so nice to see you again. I remember the paper that you wrote with Roger Shepard.
Wow.
So that was really nice to hear that it actually
impacted.
Yeah, that it's actually for him also was as much fun as it was for us. Sorry to tell this long story.
No, that was amazing.
Give you because you mentioned.
Yeah, no, I loved listening to it. I know a lot of our audience is very familiar with the whole concept of heart problem of consciousness. So this backstory is very interesting, gives a lot of more depth to this topic. Going off in a little bit of a tangent, or maybe not, in the terms of astrophysics, in the context of astrophysics, is there any type of answer or hypothesis on whether we have free will or is everything determined?
I have the feeling that the whole notion of asking, do we have free will, sooner or later we will have a deeper understanding of the mind. And in that deeper understanding of the mind, it will turn out to be the wrong question.
What do you mean by that?
What I mean is that in quantum mechanics, one of the big mysteries in quantum mechanics is that you can measure the position, but if you do that, the better you measure it, the less you can say about velocity, and the other way around. So it means that an innocent question is, oh, I have a billiard ball. It is moving. At this moment, I take a snapshot. It is here. The next moment, I take a snapshot. Is there. Each snapshot is a position in space. If you take the distance divided by the time between them, then you have the velocity. So of course, I can determine the position and the velocity of the same billiard ball. The answer is in quantum mechanics, you cannot. But that was not only not known, it was nobody could have expected it. I mean, it was such a different concept than the classical mechanics of Newton. Even relativity theory was still a classical theory. The transition from classical to quantum theories showed you that every elementary particle, every little piece of matter, or little piece of mind, of a little piece of light or of energy, any piece of matter or energy or both is such that you cannot, the description should have built in that by definition you cannot see both. And the definition, by definition, is because the experiments show you that every experiment no experiment has ever been able to show, to measure the distance of complementary quantities like position and velocity, or like energy and time. That's another pair. So the experimental discovery, you cannot see them, you cannot determine them together, is codified in the theory as saying that by definition in the theory, any good theory should by definition not allow that. So my hunch is that if we have a better understanding of the mind to the point of actually talking about the notion of will, my best guess, and I'm willing to bet 100 to 1 or whatever, that the notion of free will turn out to be the wrong question, like the question in quantum mechanics of position and velocity, but it will be a wrong question of which we cannot hope to guess the question now, because it will be more wonderful, more full of wonder than what we can at the moment come up with in our fantasy, in our imagination. Does it make some sense?
It does. It completely does.
That's why I don't work on the question of free will.
Right.
I think it's a leftover of the European overemphasis on rationality and underemphasis on central aspects of the mind, where the notion of will is not a question of I choose heads or tails or whatever. The notion of will is so intertwined with all the human qualities of wisdom, of compassion, of all these other things which are filtered out in classical mechanics as to make it all basically rational and numbers and measurements.
Very interesting. Piet, we were talking backstage about your interest in meditation and contemplation. So how about you talk a little bit about that?
My own interest?
Yes.
Well, where do I start? There are so many places to start and so many places to get into a long monologue.
Maybe about just why you, well, I guess what attracted you to meditation and then the process of contemplation. A little bit about that, maybe.
The short answer is that when I was exposed to the idea of meditation, I tried it out towards the end of high school, and I found that it felt to me like using my mind as a laboratory, just the same way that I had built a telescope or done other chemical and whatever experiments. So that felt natural to me, and I thought, what I hadn't yet chosen what to do for my studies. When I go to university next year, there is the question, what shall I study? But as soon as I had discovered that meditation was equally empirical, using your own mind and the experience of your own mind to understand the mind, using my experience of matter to understand matter, that seemed so similar that I thought, I wanted to become an astronomer.
Okay.
But as soon as I discovered that the study of the mind is equally scientific, I was in I was wondering what to do. I still like the idea of astronomy, studying the universe in the largest way. But now I had this new interest in studying the mind by breathing and seeing how that influenced your mind, and then reading more about meditation, contemplation, going deeper into it, trying to see what I could replicate myself, very much like my natural science experiments for a few years before that. I thought, well, I looked in the catalog of the different choices I had at college. There were many different departments, some of which I had heard of, some I had never heard of, but there was no department of reality studies.
Mm.
There wasn't
Right.
a department which allowed me to study matter as well as mind. So what is a poor boy to do? I mean, I was really stuck, and for a while I was wondering, should I even go to a university? Either maybe I should go to Japan to study Zen Buddhism, or maybe to India to study like Advaita Vedanta, which I had just heard about. But then I thought, well, if I go to a completely different culture, maybe I can become a contemplative. But I don't want to give up my science. I want to have it both. So what I decided to do is to stay in an academic career, and but I still wanted which department? No department of reality studies. Should I study astrophysics? But that's only matter. Maybe I should study philosophy. Philosophy officially claims to be the oldest, the wisest, the deepest way of thinking about reality as a whole, including the mind. But I loved to read about ancient philosophy. To some extent, I was also somewhat interested in more modern philosophy. Kant, for example.
Mm-hmm.
Kant was an astrophysicist as well as a philosopher. Very few people know that. The theory, we have talked about planets. The theory of the formation of the planets, which we even know is the leading theory, was called the Kant-Laplace hypothesis. Kant, the philosopher, and Laplace, the astronomer, or really Laplace, the only astronomer, Kant being both an astronomer and a philosopher. The theory they developed is still the leading theory. So Kant was one of the last few people who was both a natural philosopher studying matter and what we traditionally would call philosopher, thinking about how it all hangs together. But compared to Plato and Socrates, it was so rational and so dry and so put together with the ordinary mind. There was no sense of the wonder and awe which I saw in Plato and in Socrates. Also, I have to add here, I was lucky in the sense that I still got an old-fashioned education in Holland. The school I went to, besides my native Dutch, everybody had to learn it was a 6-year school combining middle and high school. Besides Dutch, we all had to learn English, German, and French, the neighboring countries.
Right.
If you drive for 2 hours from the middle of Holland, you have to speak a different language to order coffee or doing anything.
Yeah.
So that was natural. But we also learned Latin and Greek.
Oh, wow.
And it was Greek, which I enjoyed so much more than Latin. There were these battle stories about Caesar subjugating the area of France, etc. But when we read Homer and then later Plato about Socrates' apology and Plato's ideas, that was really what gave me a sense that Western philosophy can be really very interesting. And I was thinking if that can be combined with contemplation, maybe that would be better place to start than astrophysics. So here I had ancient philosophy, And I had astrophysics, but I also realized, because I was forced, fortunately, to learn 5 foreign languages, and I could do it because nobody told me that it couldn't be done.
It's amazing.
If I would have been born in America, they would have told me, or in many other countries, they would have told me, 5 languages, you can't do that. But we didn't know it couldn't be done, so everybody did it.
Wow. Yeah, and you just mentioned, when you were talking about the Socrates, and we just had a few days ago a biologist on our podcast who he's basically a believer of Stoicism, a philosopher. So and we were able to relate a lot to that as well, and kind of make connections between Stoicism and Advaita Vedanta too, which was amazing. It's so interesting to hear your background about like your inclination in science, astrophysics at the same time, philosophy, and that whole aspect of consciousness and meditation. That's amazing. It's always really good to have a combination, especially now. Like I think I was telling you backstage that I graduated in consciousness studies.
Yeah.
And like maybe like 20 years back, this probably was not a thing.
Oh, no.
Right? Even now, it's a little bit rare, but I love how consciousness, the study of the mind, science of mind and meditation is becoming like a very big topic, even in the whole science industry, which is, I think that's really progressive, to be very honest.
Yeah. May I correct this?
Yes.
The Stoics.
Yes, do.
I told you that I was bored by most of the Latin that I had to read. We read a little bit of Vigil.
I think that's how it's pronounced.
The English pronunciation of Latin is so different from the continental pronunciation. So, but most of it was about battles. But in the last year, we got the freedom to choose our own writer to study Latin, and I chose Seneca, the Stoic, one of the leading Stoics. And that was really wonderful. So Seneca in Latin and Plato in Greek literature, those were the two parts of my inspiration. So I was really happy that you connected that with Advaita Vedanta.
Yes.
These things are so naturally connectable. If we, in the next generation or the current generation, finally give the opportunity in education.
Yeah, definitely.
For people to be exposed to all of these together.
As we close the conversation, I want to talk about one last topic. It is deep. I don't know if you've ever thought about this, but it's something that's been on my mind for a long time. It's one of those existential questions. Like when we talk about the concept of death, right? It's whether it's in any culture, right? Like when we talk about Hinduism, where it's essentially like the whole process of burning the person, and it comes into elements, right? You have ash. And then in other religions, it's when you bury the body, it's like it eventually decomposes. Have you ever thought of the fact like that essentially us, in terms of our matter, is basically the play of 5 elements, right? And that essentially mixes into the entire universe once our lifetime is done. How does that play into the whole, concept of what is this universe and why we are here?
That is such a fascinating question.
And the purpose of life, I guess we can also add in here.
First of all, the Greek had 4 elements. The Chinese had 5 elements.
Yes.
And the Tibetans also had 5 elements as a combination of both. The Greek had earth, water, earth, water, air, and fire. The Tibetan had the same in a slightly different order, but they also has space. In addition to those 4, they considered space as an element. Very interesting, because in general relativity, space-time is a dynamic medium. So it is more on a par with matter and energy than the system that the Greeks developed. And the Tibetan system turns out to be more close to the more modern view that space also is on a par with the other elements. I'm not saying there is any connection to that. I mean, who knows? But it is at least interesting that different cultures made a different choice. And the Chinese idea of elements is completely different. It is not the components. The Greek, especially the Greek, say that everything, every form of matter is a composition of different amounts of each of the four elements. The Greek theory of elements is more a dynamic idea of how each element can transform into another one. So it is a dynamic system which is more biological than physical. And indeed, they do count wood as one of the elements, which the other two don't. They are more physics oriented.
Yeah, that's amazing. And the purpose of life, according to you? That's the closing question.
Well, the purpose of life. May I go back to death before I talk about the purpose of life?
Yeah, please do. I was waiting for that. Go, yes.
Because you asked about death and about cremation and about the elements. To talk about death and to talk about the end of life, the purpose of life, I mean, both together. What I have found is that in the two forks of the road, the one fork is following the fashion of the time that you start with matter and then mind. The other is to take mind and matter equally seriously. If I take my favorite branch, taking mind and matter equally seriously, and going to compare different contemplations. In my whole life, in more than half a century of study of, as an undergraduate, to spend summers in a monastery in Holland and talking with the oldest monks and seeing how amazingly different their mind was and their way of thinking and their whole view of the reality. And meeting people from meeting Zen teachers and Tibetan Buddhists and Advaita Vedanta teachers and Taoists. In all these cultures, in reading books and by meeting people with only their oral tradition, the one single thing which I recognized was present across the board, everywhere, was the Advaita of Advaita Vedanta, the non-two-ness, the non-duality, that the notion of subject and object, there are appearances, we appear. For us appears the sense of self, the sense of a subject as opposed to object. But the duality is an appearance. It is not ultimately real as separate things. It's the ultimate reality is that they appear together. Again, like magnetism and electricity, like body and mind. But also, if I take Buddhism, the deepest and most important and the most difficult things to learn, all the books which deeply go into the contemplation say that to really understand no self and to really understand no time, those are the two most difficult things. So, if you really want to get the deepest answers to the meaning of life, And if you think makes sense to compare different contemplative traditions, and if you want to try to find the common elements where they all agree upon, then I would say the ultimate, the best description within the limits of description and concepts, the best description would be that time does not exist. There is only what we call the here, the present moment, and self does not exist in the sense that it does not exist as something separate, that the non-duality of Advaita Vedanta also means that every memory is a current memory of the past. Every idea about the future is a current idea of the future. So empirically, purely empirical, like a scientist, if we limit ourselves to what is empirical accessible, only the present moment is accessible. And if we limit ourselves to what we can say about the notion of a self, well, the self that we normally talk about, my body and my mind, is something which also comes given together with everything else. So an Advaita in Sanskrit, a non-duality in English, a non-duality view of the present moment in which everything is given together, self and object together, and any idea of time is given together. That is my idea of the nature of reality. And within that nature of reality, that is the only place to talk about the purpose of life. And any attempt to talk about the purpose of life in terms of concept is completely false by definition.
Yeah. I love that. I personally consider myself a non-dualist, so I really loved listening to you, to be honest. And it's amazing how much knowledge and wisdom you've gathered throughout your career, both in science, of course, which the world knows, but also in philosophy and spirituality. So I loved listening to you, and thank you so much for being here. You are a very, very humble and compassionate person, and definitely one of the best guests we've had so far. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you so much. I mean, I'm so grateful that the two of you have created this environment where it is so natural to talk about these things completely off the cuff, completely in sort of meandering ways, that is okay with you, and you have created an atmosphere. I mean, everything here fits into, is conducive. It feels right as a place to philosophize.